Look, this is an old problem, and with old remedies. There's a record from Arthurton in 1899 of a farmer reporting that he had four mouse plagues in the previous 20 years, and that phosphorised wheat placed around the paddocks at sowing prevents them from doing much damage. We haven't changed much from that situation in the last 130 years. So it's an old problem, but it is getting worse. If you look back through the literature, when we've had mouse plagues that have caused, if you call a plague something where you've got widespread damage with invasions of homes and sheds and townships and storages, there's been an event of that type that I've been able to discover records of about every 5 years between 1880 and 1975. But records of significant crop damage only in about 1 out of 3 of those events. In the last 30 odd years, the plagues have become more frequent, and crop damage has been occurring on each occasion, and also, as Andrew mentioned, some significant crop damage occurring in between those events, where it's not really a plague by most people's standing, but farmers are still spending money trying to control it. I've spoken about this a number of times before. The changes in farming practice that are helping mice are the reduction in tillage, reduction in livestock numbers, and the whole general trend to conservation farming, so that we've got more mice now for any given set of seasonal conditions. The problem is we've also got more damage for any given number of mice, because the reduced tillage is actually delaying the timing of population declines through into winter, from autumn through into winter. Shallow sowing's making grain more readily available to them, and we've got more crops that are providing a prolonged period of vulnerability. I was asked to talk about what are we in for this year. Well, I'm going to talk more generally about what are we in for each year, but for a start, you can get a general idea from things like predicting when a mouse plague is going to occur based on historical events. And there's been a number of attempts to model mouse plagues. You can conduct monitoring programs on a regional basis, or you can rely on what other people are telling you. But the second issue is identifying problem paddocks by looking at what we know about risk factors and using the sort of monitoring techniques that Andrew has been talking about. Just to cover off on it, the current situation is, up until a month ago, everyone was sort of saying to me, oh, well, there don't seem to be too many mice around compared to last year, but I have heard in the last couple of weeks a couple of people suggesting that, particularly on Western EP, they've got worrying numbers of mice and had quite a lot of barley hit the ground because of various issues prior to harvest, so there's probably plenty of food there for them. The models have been attempted to try and work out when mouse plagues are going to occur have been based on things like rainfall and temperature variation, yields and crop areas. All of them have identified high grain yields and high rainfall during the cropping season as being risk factors. The other issues that come into it are rainfall at either end of the growing season, autumn rainfalls, November or summer rains. There's some suggestion that mouse plagues are much more common if you get a bumper year following after a drought. Problem is that all of these models have about a 20 or 30% failure rate, and the ones which are more accurate rely on population monitoring data to supplement them, so that makes them a more expensive option. At a farm level, the factors that landholders have been reporting have resulted in higher mouse numbers in individual paddocks all tend to revolve around having more food available to the mice and better cover. And that's no surprise really, I suppose. One of the problems though is that during a severe mouse plague it seems that some paddocks can still have really severe problems, or some individual farms can have severe problems where these risk factors all appear to be either low or moderate. It may be that we're not identifying all of the risk factors, and it may be that some of the individuals' perceptions of the levels of these issues such as grain loss at harvest are inaccurate. So, in any given year, can we use regional predictions to guide management at a farm level? Well, there are some reasons to believe it might be a good idea, that severe plagues tend to be widespread, at least within a region. Mice are highly mobile. Some work done last year with radio tracking mice up at Butte in a stubble around sowing time. They were covering 500 metres in a night. So on that basis you might think, well, if they're in this paddock today, they can be in the next paddock tomorrow, and they can be 2 kilometres down the road the next time. So all we really need to know is how many mice are in the general area. And they do build up for 6 months prior to most of the problems around seeding, so there's enough time to try and work out what's going on. There are some problems with that approach though. First is that surveys are expensive, and they are limited to a small area that's being surveyed, and some of these historical precedents may no longer apply if we've changed the farming system so much that the underlying factors are different. The second is that even within farms, the yield losses are highly variable. When I spoke to growers on Eyre Peninsula about what had happened in 2010, I asked them what had been their estimate of yield loss due to mouse damage at crop establishment in their worst affected crops and in the least affected crops on the same farm. Most of the worst affected crops had been baited, albeit too late, and very few of the least affected crops had been baited, yet we still had this major difference in the level of damage within the farm. And repeating this survey across much of southern Australia last year, albeit in some of the areas where there were less mice, gave a similar result. So management decisions need to be made on a paddock by paddock basis, and regional predictions are not going to be reliable for making those individual paddock decisions. You need the sort of additional monitoring that Andrew is talking about. Mice sometimes cause severe problems in maturing crops. There's generally a major damage occurring around seeding, less problem during the vegetative stages, and then when the heads come out they can slaughter them. And growers are faced with decisions about whether they should be baiting in crops that have established reasonably well, still have lots of sign of mice out in them, and they don't know whether to bait or to wait. Some of the monitoring that was done by the NRM board up at Woodner in 2010 shows that the timing of population decline in those crops can be highly variable. If the numbers drop during July and early August, then probably you've saved your money by not baiting. If they persist through into September, you can lose half your crop in a couple of weeks. And those sort of decisions will probably be made on how risk averse the individual is and how valuable they believe the crop is going to be. So just to sum up, are they here to stay? Well, the answer is yes. Historically, we've actually very rarely seen a severe mouse plague 2 years in a row. Sometimes there's a bit of a problem one year and then a big plague the next year, or vice versa. But I think it's possible that farming systems have changed the environment for the mice so much that we now may be quite likely to face persistent problems whenever there's enough food around for them. And so I think it's more critical now than it has ever been to try and minimise the grain residues and seed residues from weeds in cropping paddocks to minimise the damage and the costs associated with mouse plagues.